Now, fresh Imani reports powered by social media reactions reveal public discontent for the performance of the NDC government in the past 6 months, highlighting decline in public trust and controversies over selective justice and governance inconsistencies. We hear from Imani, but we're joined by Salam Brantier, Vice President Imani, and I want to understand a bit more about what triggered. But before that, I will be also joined by Adam Senano, co-chair of Citizens Movement Against Corruption. Please stay with me, but let me start with you, Salam. Thank you for joining us this morning. First, what triggered the research, before we even go into the methodology, how you entered into the nuances and all of that, but what triggered this particular research for the polls, as you describe it, the money polls?
Or this sentiment analysis activity is something we started last year, basically because we realized that social media has become the convergent point, or the point of convergence for people to really air out how they feel about certain things. And for us at Imani, because governance or citizens' perception of governance is very key or core to some of the things that we like to look out for, we decided to do this Imani polls to measure people's feelings about the government or the opposition, or things that are trending or issues that are trending, and how people view those issues. Because most of the time, the news comes from the newsmakers, whilst we do not also have a forum for which people who react to these things can be measured. So Imani polls was actually done to analyze the sentiment of people on the ground, people who comment or people who willingly comment on social media. And the focus has been mainly on Facebook, Twitter, or X, and TikTok, as well as other news channels where interaction is done, so that people can, we can use that to sort of measure the barometer, or the voice of the people and their reactions to things that have been happening. So that was the basis for doing this Imani Pulse, and we have done it for about a year now.
Okay.
This current, yeah.
Right. Thank you, Salam. Because you have just introduced the methodology and let's just stay in there a little bit more. Can you explain particularly the methodology? And I'm asking this because you realize that though all of these social media platforms that you've mentioned, they all behave quite differently, you know. And so I want to understand what kind of tool you used for Facebook, X, TikTok, and the other parts that you may have mentioned.
Yeah, so basically what we do is that we pick out certain keywords, and these keywords are then used to determine the responses or the issues that come out. We cannot definitely score the whole of Facebook, or the whole of Twitter, or the whole of TikTok or YouTube or podcasts. But what we do is that we take sample views from what we call mentions. So, for example, if a post mentions NDC or NDC Ghana or John Dramani Mahama or President Mahama, then those ones are filtered out. And then out of those ones, not all of them are taken, but samples are taken from those ones. So basically, when those mentions are made on Facebook, on Twitter or X, or on TikTok, or on YouTube, or on other channels, we take those ones. And then what we do is that we also curate or analyze all the comments that come under those, posts, to determine the tone or the language. So, for example, if there was something that said, especially in connection with this, sentiment analysis, or something that was said like oral is performing, or NDC's oral is performing, then that is becomes highlighted, or that becomes picked up. Then the comments under it. So if somebody says, I do not think oral is doing well, that is a negative sentiment. Or if somebody says that I am not sure about what oral is supposed to achieve, that is negative. But if somebody said oral is doing the work it's supposed to do, then that is positive. So using that kind of language, and then we're using certain AI tools, we are then able to, use the algorithm to determine whether the sentiment is positive or negative. It is still not a completely exact science. So most of those that are unsure are put in a neutral bin, and those ones are not, because of the lack of clarity. And sometimes how some people would have maybe bad grammar or will not be able to speak well, or maybe there's sarcasm involved. Those ones are filtered out, and then the clearly positive and the clearly negative ones are taken, because then those ones show a clear trajectory of feeling, or a clear feeling about how they feel about something. So using that, so you take lots and lots and lots of comments or impressions, and then you filter it down to a few that are very clear, and then those ones then are used to determine the sentiment. So that is how it's done. So it's a filtration process that goes through several steps.
Okay.
But all those iterations then give us a clearer view of how people feel.
Okay, Kojo, I'll let you go to Uncle Adam Senano, but quickly before we get there. So the thematic areas, governance, credibility is in question, perceived selective justice, job insecurity, and mass dismissals, polarized social media discourse, strong calls for transparency and reform. I'm concerned about authenticity in the comments that you may have sampled to arrive at some of the percentages. I ask this because we're quite aware of the presence of people who are, no matter what, supporters of political parties, who just go on social media and will just type anything at all. What kind of authenticity tool did you use to measure whether this comment is fair and just?
So beyond just people commenting, it also ranks the kind of people that comment. So so when you have a social media address, for example, there are what we call bots. Yeah. And so bots or people have what we call bots, which they just use to type a certain language all the time. So those ones are also filtered out, because you would want organic postings or people with organic accounts. And most of these bots do not have any interactions. They have maybe only like 10 friends or 20 friends, or 20 followers, depending on the the platform you're using. So most of those ones are dismissed. And then we look at people who probably have been on Facebook for a while, or on X for a while, and then those who have a certain kind of ranking where they are multiple interactions with different people and all of that. So usually the ones that do these targeted things are usually bot-like, and they have a certain kind of way in which they interact. So those ones are usually not even included in the filtration process at all. Okay. So you look at normally people who have accounts that normally interact with people, and those ones are ranked. They are ranked even in the systems in which they are, or in the social media platforms in which they are. Their types of engagements are limited. So those ones are not part of them.
Okay. Salam, while I recognize that you're the researcher, I'm just curious, in which part of the themes really came as a surprise for you, especially on the score or the percentages? Is it the governance, credibility that's in question? Is it the perceived selective justice? Is it the job insecurity and mass dismissals, polarized social media discourse, or the strong calls for transparency? Which one has your personal attention?
A lot of them, in fact, all of these issues have my attention. But I believe that one of the issues that I believed was spiked a lot was the presidential jet issue, which I thought was a bit surprising, because there were certain instances where it became a big matter somewhere around May. But beyond that, most of the issues that were being talked about, I expected some of these reactions, because the government is thriving on a lot of goodwill, and with a lot of goodwill comes a lot of responsibility. So people are anxious because, first of all, they seem to want to have that goodwill prevail, and they also want to see a lot of action being done, especially with things like oral, especially with things like keeping the fiscal prudence, So, for example, there was a time when Forcing was a lot in the news because there was around February, March to April, the dollar was appreciating. I mean, the city was appreciating against the dollar. So those things created a lot of good buzz. But then, on the contrary, or on the flip side, the job dismissals were also a big cause of worry because a lot of people were being affected and they thought that they shouldn't be affected. So these things were also very informative for some of us in understanding how people perceived a government that has just come into power from a transition and how people were receiving some of the government policies. But all in all, it looks more like a lot of people are very reactive because they want instant solutions, or they want the government to work very quickly on quite a lot of things. And chief among them has been even the prosecution of people perceived to have been corrupt. People want to see the back of them, or people want to see justice being done. And so a lot of the delays, yesterday, for example, I listened to the Minister of Communication. He was talking about due process. So it looks like a lot of people think that the due process activity was not, or the due process, the will to do due process was not fast enough for them. So these are some of the things that we're getting from the ground. Of course, I mean, the most of the insights were voluminous. We just had to summarize it so that the main topical ones would come out. But then there's a lot of expectations from this government. So it means that they cannot renege, or they cannot slow down or ask for favors, if so to speak.
Right. Salam, stay with us. I would come back to you after Kojo just engaged Edem. When we come to you, my concern will be that because the government, per the report, seem to have been enjoying really goodwill at the time of the swearing in, that very elegant swearing in that we watched on TV, then quickly up until April, the oral conversation seemed to, the pressure on government, especially on oral, started coming up. I want to know what you think, or per the reports, the government may have missed out between January ending, February and March, so that this oral sentiment would have started in April when I come to you. But Kojo, you want to engage?
Yeah, but I mean, on Edem, I know he's co-chair of the Citizens Movement Against Corruption. So let's start with him on oral. I mean, Edem, you had the citizens' sentiment on oral. They feel that it's losing credibility because of some actions that they've seen, and thinking that this is a witch hunt. I mean, from where you sit, what do you make of this sentiment by the public, and what actually, from your professional point of view, is happening with oral?
Well, thank you. First of all, let me salute Imani, Solomon Crew for their work. And I believe it's some excellent questions, which I'm not sure Salom has adequately discharged, because we don't have clarity on the sampling methodology. Because if you're doing appropriate sampling, then we know that the results are representative. It's difficult at this point to establish whether the methodology allows us to draw substantive conclusions. I'll say at the moment, perhaps this is just indicative, as we'd say in research, rather than conclusive. Again, the issue of the affiliations of the individuals, whether they have political affiliations, and how that was filtered, would then bring interpretation, will influence the interpretation we give to the results. Having said that, it's always useful to look at the patterns. And yes, citizens appear quite concerned about the speed of effecting the oral mandates and commitment. I think that there are a number of issues there. Government should be sensitive to this concern. I believe that once it involves the rights and freedoms of people, you need to proceed carefully. However, it may also be the case that the pool of people who are handling the cases should be expanded. So let's go beyond the Attorney General's department, bring on board the OSP, bring on board potential private sector contractors who can also investigate to kind of speed up these and draw conclusions. There must be some vetting process to identify persons who can assist. Because with the number of cases they have, proceeding may take quite long if they don't have many more hands on board. Now, the issue of witch hunting can only be cured when the results of the investigations are complete and we have the opportunity to review the investigative reports and the conclusions drawn. And I think that if they do a good job of investigations and putting out reports in the public domain, we will all have the opportunity to assess what quality of work was done and whether the conclusions drawn have merit.
But I mean, from where you sit and listening to someone like the General Secretary of the NDC say that some people in government today are trying to cut deals, what does this bring to the oral itself in terms of helping fight corruption? And how the public, how that will inform the reaction of the public to this oral concept?
Well, I think, in my view, the General Secretary's comments were commendable. I think anybody in any space identifying potential spaces of corruption and raising the red flag assist the fight against corruption by making it less likely that persons so inclined will proceed. But when you look at the context, it definitely would then fuel greater public sentiment that can we trust these people? Can we fully trust this group of people? And the persons will be more cautious in having the kind of confidence you may have seen at the beginning of the tenure as reported by Imani. So, yes, it might have some influence on how people think, but in my view, to fight corruption, we need to be very transparent about it whenever we see it. And we are much better off having General Secretaries telling us the information they have received than getting them silenced because the rest of the party fear that their image will be dented as to speak about these issues.
Okay, but kindly stay with us. Yesterday on Top Story, we took responses from government and we spoke to the Minister of State in charge of Government Communication, Felix Kwakye-Ofosu, on what this survey, how they are receiving it and what this informs their actions. Let's take a listen to him. When we come back, we'll bring in, Adam Senano, Salom Branche, and also Dr. Osai Kopon, who's joining us on this discussion.
Well, let me indicate that as a general principle, we value feedback and do appreciate efforts by civil society and other actors within society to draw attention to what perceptions people hold about government and its activities. I must also indicate that because we value feedback, we also have our own tools that we use to assess public perceptions and how the public receives what we do as a government. There are many of the issues that have been raised that require further probing. For instance, the matter of prostitutions and the general education of oral. The Attorney General has at least on 4 or 5 different occasions updated the public on the progress of work regarding oral. On the NSB case, for instance, everybody in Ghana knows that that matter is in court, and therefore it is the court that dictates how the case runs. Currently, the judiciary is on a legal vacation, and therefore cases cannot be heard. When they return, that case will resume. There's one other case that is in court regarding the Sky Train. And in all, there are 7 people who are standing trial. Over 80 people have been investigated. Dockets have either been built or are in the process of being built in 20 different cases. And when the judiciary returns from the legal vacation, many more cases will go to court.
All right, so that's Felix Kwakye-Ofosu that they have their own, system of measuring how the Ghanaian sentiment is, but they also accept the feedback. MFA.
Well, we'll bring in Dr. John Osei Kwapon. Doc, if you've seen this report, Do you find it, what's the accuracy level for you? Can you hear me, Doc?
Can you please hear me?
Yes, thank you. How would you measure the accuracy level of this report?
Well, I mean, Imani has been doing this for some time now, tracking this sentiment using comments that individuals share on various social media handles. So I think the more they've done it, the more they've improved on the methodological approach in capturing these sentiments. Of course, there is a certain element of subjectivity in making sense of these kinds of qualitative information that you gather in public domains. You know, when do you pick it? How do you pick it? From where? But overall, I would vouch for Imani, knowing the quality of the work that they have done over the years. That this is work that I would vouch that they approached it with care and rigor in terms of their methodological approach.
Well, so for a little over 6 months for a new government, if you look at the findings of this report, what would you say, Uncle Adam? And forgive me, I keep calling Uncle Adam because he's known me since I was a child, and then now I'm unable to say Adam. Forgive me, but he says that he would rather call it as indicators rather than conclusive. But it's just, is that, do you agree? And then what would this mean for the government?
So I agree with that sentiment. What I always say is that whenever you get survey data, whenever you get these kinds of feedback, I always say that if for nothing at all, treat them as what kinds of signals are your citizens sending to you on important matters of governance and policy. I think for me, what surprised me though is 6 months, if you look at the election and the election results and the massive goodwill that greeted the party, then the biggest signal I take from it is one of worry that within 6 to 7 months, there seemed to be that erosion of some of that goodwill. And for the government then, what does that signal to them, and how do they make sense of some of the erosion that the Imani polls is showing, and how do they respond and rectify whatever signals is emanating through this? But it's quite a bit early for me. If I look at past trajectories, it takes a little bit more time for the public to start wavering a little bit for a party that they elected. So if you look at Kufuor's time, Afrobarometer 2002, for example, it took up to 2005 to see some of that erosion of the goodwill that greeted his 2000 election. You see that again in 2017, very stellar ratings for former President Akufo-Addo, but then you start seeing the erosion in 2019. So again, 6 months is a little too early, and that's where I am a little concerned that some of that goodwill has eroded.
Still have you. So again, I'm railing on the goodwill that per the report the government was enjoying early January. Now, I like to think there are some things that you found that didn't make their way to the report. Let me in a bit. Between February and March, specifically because in March was when the Minister for Finance went to Parliament and read to us the budgets and some of the things that they were going to be abolishing taxes, which, I mean, your report as well also highlights. Are there a few other things, some nuances that you didn't find quite tangible to want to provide in this report that contributed to the quickly decline between April and May?
So I've been trying to think of any major events or what you may call any major fault lines in the government's approach to governance that may have changed perceptions. Because again, if you think back to the budget, the key issues that were touched on in the budget, some of the major policy moves the government made to, relieve the financial burden on Ghanaians through the elimination of certain taxes. I believe the president has tried to set the right tone when it comes to governance and all of those things. So I've been trying, since I read the report this morning, I've been trying to look for other kinds of events that may have started sowing some kind of concerns in the minds of Ghanaians. Oral is one that comes to mind. I don't know if maybe it's not, quote unquote, moving fast enough in the minds of Ghanaians, and therefore that is what is sort of creating some of that concerns and some of that angst. I don't know if it's because even though the right policies are being implemented, that individuals are not feeling it immediately, so that is what is creating some of those concerns. But policies and programs also do take time to mature and bear fruit.
Okay.
So the nuances, I think I still have to keep probing further just to make sense of why this shift in public sentiment.
Okay. Salam, do I still have you? Are you still with us? Do I still have Salam? Okay, Salam, if you can hear me, my question to you before I left, we went to the other panelists, would be that between January, February, March, especially in March, was when the finance minister went to Parliament and then introduced all these tax reliefs. Then few days, few weeks into April, May, which I see in the report suggesting that some of the factors that have contributed to the quick decline, the goodwill, it looks to me as though that was quite quick. Have you been finding other things that didn't make their way to the reports that contributed to the decline? Okay, I'm not sure if I got Salam on, but maybe because you want to finalize with Adam?
Yeah, I mean, so Adam, if you listen to, the government's response there, we spoke to Felix. What do you pick a sense that government, as you say, that this should be sort of a wake-up call? Do you sense that government is seeing that, and therefore they will be working on the pointers that this survey by Imani is pointing out to them?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, sir.
Yeah. So I don't know.
This is Salom. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Salom. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to respond to a few things. Yes. Right after there was a very good independence celebration and all of that, which triggered a lot of positive buzz, as well as Ato Forson's statements and then the abolition of the taxes. What happened was that between April and May, you would realize that there were quite a few high-profile arrests and then activities by EOCO. And some of these activities by EOCO then triggered a lot of comments from what I would say pro-NPP people on social media. You would realize that there were events where people went to pickets at EOCO, and then there was what we call the Rambo-style arrests, which greatly divided opinion. Around that time, of course, there was a lot of vocal activity by people who probably I would say are sympathetic to the cause of the NPP, and that could have triggered some kind of bias or some kind of amplification. All right, because in all of these things, there are things that also amplify the sentiments, and we should understand that the goodwill itself is there. It is some aspects of the government's credibility that people are questioning. And the issue here is that you have to balance, the content of the report very clearly to be able to distill that. There is a certain threshold of goodwill that hasn't been eroded as much as the sense of the credibility of some of the actions that were taken. So the Rambo-style arrests, and then the fact that a lot of people were also being dismissed, and then new appointments were being made at the same time, caused some kind of amplification of some of those things. Down the line, as we fine-tune some of these things, we are going to come up with some of these parameters. So, for example, an event like Wuntumi's arrest amplified responses on social media by about 4%. By about 4 times the usual number of comments that would have had an NDC or NPP situation. And when those come in, then of course they add to the aggregate of all the responses or all the interactions that are there. So these are all things that are, I would say, are nuances that can also shift some of the things, because not most people, they say bad news travels faster than good news. So there are instances where people will comment more on something that triggers them more than others that do not. So these are some of the things that we are realizing as we are building this thing up. And of course, this is just the early days, and these are just the early refinements of the model. And as time goes on, the model is going to even be able to capture more important aspects of this, and then we can come up with even more comprehensive reports around how some of these things trigger people for them to be able to react more than in other cases where they do not. So sometimes it's business as usual because some promises are being kept, but where the promises are not being kept or there are variances, then you get to see some of these things come up. And then we also have to note that a lot of the people who are commenting on social media these days are between the ages of 18 and 35. And their level of patience or their perception of how things should work are a bit different from 2 decades ago and a decade ago, where news filtered through newspapers and therefore took a little while before people were able to digest them. But today, with the presence of multiple sources of news, multiple sources of data, multiple sources of commentary, even with what we call influencers on social media, with so many of them who are even politically motivated, who have large followings. These things all tend to influence or shape the thinking of people. And these are pages, some of the things we do are also that we monitor some of these pages and also glean the sentiment from them. So in doing that, then you are able to have a clearer idea of what people are thinking on the ground. Because note that whilst we might have our perceptions of governance, what is being interpreted in the eyes of the common person is also a bit different, because they perceive it from a different angle or from a different source of I would say bias, prejudice, or pre-knowledge than what we see on the ground. And seeing that a lot of the audience is also a demographic that is a bit more different from what some of us are used to, there are the tendencies for these interpretations to be there. And it is very instructive for us, especially those of us in the anti-corruption sector, in the governance sector, and in these sectors, to be able to look at these things and determine to ourselves whether even policy-related communications are being articulated in the right way, or in the way that makes the new young Ghanaian understand the issues very clearly, or the depth of the issues very clearly. So for me, this is one of the takeaways that I see, that whilst we are doing these things, a lot of things get revealed in terms of how people actually perceive these things, or whether are the events being articulated the right way for people to even understand them more. And then we even have to even look at certain other newer dimensions, like the TikTok aspect, which most people do not even understand, but also has had a lot of very, very important, takeaways for me. And understanding that demographic is also very key to the whole, discussion.
Salam, we're grateful to you for joining. Adam Sanan, let me bring you in here and pick your thought on whether you see government picking this as pointers and working on. Yesterday, we were told by Felix that when it comes to even the sacking that happened, the chief of staff has set up a committee, and they are reviewing this appointment and the sacking that came thereafter to see which ones were on merit and which ones, and the ones that are deemed to have been unfairly terminated will be reinstated. Now, do you feel the government is picking this survey as pointers and to work on to say that, okay, some decisions we took were not right and therefore we want to correct them?
Yes, the initial feedback from the minister suggests that, first of all, I think he said they appreciate feedback whenever they get it. He also talks about there are tools that they use to, as it were, validate. and then talked about some of the actions. Incidentally, for me, reading the report, the March report of the dismissals struck me because it appeared to me that demographic might be a category of young people very likely to be on social media. So after you had pursued these mass dismissals, they are home doing nothing, and their feelings and comments will reflect. And of course, we know that demographic of 18 to 35 is almost 60% of our population. So they can really influence what happens going forward. So it is important that government looks at it, whether they will indeed then, if people have been, unfairly terminated, restore them or not, is something that we will all live to see. But I'm sure for all of us in governance, we would recommend highly to the government to take all reports seriously. I align with Prof on that. Irrespective of whether this is indicative rather than conclusive, it is always important to take these reports seriously, embrace them, mine the data, and take actions that begin to restore confidence. The tipping point on perception, one can never actually tell. So the earlier we ensure that people are working at it, the much more good results we are likely to get as a country. And so that is what they ought to be doing.
All right. Thank you very much, Adamson, the co-chair of the Citizens Movement Against Corruption. Solomon Branche is Vice President of Imani Africa. Thank you for joining. You also heard Dr. John Osai Kopon. He is a CDD fellow. And then we brought you that response from government. Felix Ofosu Kwache. This has been the big story. On the AM show, there is much more to come here on the show. Please do stay with us.